Welcome to today's lecture on ETS alignment, possible reforms for carbon market integration. The lecture is the fourth and final one in the course that you have been following. Therefore, it will have elements from all the material and discussions that came up in the previous weeks, but it will also provide additional perspective on reforms that may be necessary for carbon market integration in the future. Let us start the lecture by looking at the global carbon market landscape. For that, we will use a stylized diagram where ETSs are represented in circles of different colors, which themselves indicate the jurisdiction that may host an ETS. There are many such ETSs that are currently in force, and many more are in the pipeline. There are also many crediting mechanisms. These are represented by rectangles in our diagram. They exist to satisfy demand from entities regulated by an ETS, for example, the yellow rectangle, or they may satisfy demand from non-ETS sources, for example, the purple rectangle. Carbon Market Cooperation under Article 6.2 and Article 6.4 envisages linking of these different types of carbon markets. These links can be direct between emissions trading systems, as indicated by the arrows in our diagram. There can also be direct links between emissions trading systems and crediting mechanisms. An example is the link between the brown crediting mechanism and the light green emissions trading system. Of course, there can be indirect links as well between emissions trading systems through their common link to a crediting mechanism. This is indicated by the indirectly linked green and yellow emissions trading systems because they're both linked to the brown crediting mechanisms. There can be similarly indirect links between emissions trading systems, such as that between orange and blue emissions trading systems, as both of these systems are linked to a common system, the dark green emissions trading system. Now, all of these links can be subject to quantitative and qualitative restrictions. Types of markets, each with their own characteristics, different types of restrictions that can be imposed between any links that can be considered among these carbon markets, make the future of the global carbon market landscape very fragmented, very complex. And we need to think about that when we consider various reforms that may help further carbon market integration in the future. In theory, direct or indirect linking of all carbon markets without any restrictions on the flow of units leads to a cost-effective distribution of the mitigation effort. In the Paris Agreement context, we can think about this in two ways. First, with linking, emissions reductions targets in countries and DCs can be achieved at a lower cost than without linking. Or second, with linking, emissions reduction targets in countries and DCs can be enhanced and not lead to any higher costs than without linking when achieving the original set of nationally determined contributions. This is all good news. We can ramp up ambition or achieve the existing level of ambition at a lower cost. However, other political, economic, and environmental concerns exist with respect to linking. These can be real or perceived, but they cannot be ignored. A few examples include the distribution of mitigation efforts under linking creates winners and losers, both within and across countries. Financial transfers associated with allowance and credit trade may not be politically acceptable. It may be too large. Jurisdictions also may be unwilling to forego co-benefits that are associated with local emissions reductions, which would take place elsewhere were the link to go ahead. So, what are some conditions for linking? We'll think about two types of conditions. Preconditions to linking negotiations, those that need to be satisfied before the parties come to the table, or conditions that can be satisfied during the linking negotiations. Of the first type, we can count things like general trust, the requirement that there is some overlap of acceptable carbon prices and that linking ultimately benefits both parties. Among the conditions that can be satisfied during the linking negotiations, we can talk about confidence on environmental integrity through alignment of various design features. But most importantly among these is the agreement on market stability mechanisms. Among these, we will talk about those indicated in red in the next few slides. So, some overlap of acceptable carbon prices. ETS is a quantity-based instrument. As such, market forces determine the carbon price. That said, though, there's always a range of carbon prices, sometimes very wide, and sometimes explicit, and at other times de facto, that a jurisdiction considers acceptable given its own objectives, constraints, and national circumstances. Under linking, the price will be different. So the expected post-price link must fall in the acceptable range of all jurisdictions for them to come to the table in the first place. In the diagram on the right, what you're seeing is that in the top panel, the expected post-linking price not meeting this condition. And in the lower panel, the expected post-link price meeting this condition. Agreement on market stability mechanisms may help provide reassurance in this respect, and we will come back to this in a second. Confidence on environmental integrity. Even if the preconditions for linking have been met and parties have arrived at the negotiation table to consider how they're going to link their systems, several ETS design features need to be aligned during linking negotiations. Alignment on these can provide the required confidence that the environmental integrity of your partner or partners' systems are not in question. Now, identical design is not a requirement. However, identical design may be required for some ETS design features. So we can think about three types of alignment. Some features require compatibility, others require comparable outcomes, whereas still others may benefit from coordination and mutual understanding to make the linking work well. Some of these examples are in the diagram on the right-hand side. One feature that is extremely important is agreement on market stability mechanisms. Market stability mechanisms help jurisdictions respond so that prices don't rise too high. This may mean unsustainably high compliance costs, or that the prices fall too low. This may be inconsistent with longer-term decarbonization goals of the jurisdiction. There are many different market stability mechanisms that jurisdictions have used and can pick from. But they must be aligned in a way that doesn't create perverse or undesirable interactions, which in turn may threaten the environmental integrity or the political durability of the linking agreement. A price collar provision in linking agreements may help ease some of these concerns. Finally, some key messages from today's lecture. The global carbon market landscape is fragmented and complex. There's a lot of room for further carbon market integration that can be exploited, and Article 6 rulebook agreed in Glasgow can facilitate this integration. Further carbon market integration can reduce the cost of meeting the current set of NDCs or contribute to ramping up of ambition. Carbon market integration requires some key conditions to be met. Some of these must be satisfied before the linking negotiations, but meeting these conditions does not mean that there is going to be a linking agreement in the end. Concerns over the level and variability of expected post-linking allowance price can be a stumbling block before or during negotiations. Specific provisions in a linking agreement that reflect the overlap in the jurisdiction's acceptable allowance price ranges can help. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to interacting with you in a live session on Friday.
With a contribution from the LIFE program of the European Union.